Everybody, welcome to the Beacon Council. I'm Alan Becker, the chair of the Beacon Council, and we're delighted to have everyone here today. We have, of course, a number of our own board members from Beacon Council representing many of the businesses in the community, as well as other friends, and we're very happy to have everyone here. I just want to mention separately a few people who are in public office. Welcome, of course, our friend Commissioner Pepe Diaz. Commissioner, always a pleasure.
Thank you.
We have the Consul General of Canada, Beth Richardson, is here. Welcome. The Foreign Affairs and International Trade Consul of Canada, Louise Leger.
Louise.
What's that?
That's what she said.
Other way around.
Yeah.
Leger.
Louise.
Louise, got it. Now, if you think that was challenging, welcome the Consul General of France, Consul General Gaël de Messanville. How'd I do? And the British Consul General, Kevin McGurgan. Kevin, how are you? The Consul General of Mexico, Vladimir Hernandez. Welcome. And the Mayor of the City of Doral, Juan Carlos Bermudez. AJC. Now it's my pleasure to introduce one of my favorite all-time mayors, Mayor Manny Diaz of the City of Miami, who was elected Mayor of Miami in 2001 and then re-elected to a second term in 2005. During his tenure, I think all of us remember that the city was in some pretty bad straits, and when he left, it was in really good shape. He transformed the city of Miami through his leadership. Many innovative programs won national recognition, whether it be homeless or crime or environmental, educational leadership, and probably explains why in 2004 he was awarded Urban Innovator of the Year Award by the Manhattan Institute. In 2008, he became president of the U.S. Conference of Mayors. And even though he's an independent and formerly a Republican, he did speak. I was a Republican about 50 years ago. You know, things change, the mayor did speak at the 2008 Democratic National Convention on behalf of President Obama. Mayor Diaz recently served as a resident fellow at Harvard's Institute of Politics, and now we're happy to have him back here practicing law and providing his leadership again in the city of Miami. So to introduce our special guest, let me bring up Mayor Manny Diaz. That's his.
For the record, no offense to anyone, but I've never been a Republican.
Never.
It's truly a pleasure to welcome Ambassador Kirk to Miami, a city that understands and welcomes its growing role in the new global economy, and a city that has opened its arms to the world, and the world has come to us. Now, in addition to being a steadfast supporter of the ambassador's policies, there are two facts that really endear me to him. First, though I am a proud alum and a fan of the U, the ambassador and I share a very strong bond and love for University of Texas Longhorns football. And we have a special affinity for the outstanding defense of the Texas Longhorns. Second, he is a former mayor. In 1995, Ambassador Kirk became the first African-American mayor of Dallas with 62% of the vote. He was re-elected in a landslide with 74% of the vote in 1999. During his tenure as mayor, he earned the reputation of being a coalition builder. Don't we all wish we had more coalition builders in Washington, D.C. today? I might add that prior to serving as mayor, Ambassador Kirk also served as Secretary of State for the state of Texas. He was confirmed by the U.S. Senate as United States Trade Representative on March 2009 with a vote of 92 in favor and 5 opposed. Another landslide. Do you remember who the 5 were? A mayor never forgets. Ambassador Kirk is the first African American to hold the position of United States Trade Representative. As U.S. Trade Representative, he receives the formal title of ambassador, is a member of President Obama's cabinet, and serves as the President's principal trade advisor, negotiator, and spokesperson on trade issues. The Office of the U.S. Trade Representative is part of the Executive Office of the President and is responsible for developing and coordinating U.S. international trade, commodity, and direct investment policy, and overseeing negotiations with other countries. As U.S. Trade Representative, he has led the Obama administration's market opening negotiations and dialogue with trading partners around the world, including the conclusion and congressional passage of bilateral free trade agreements with Korea, Colombia, and Panama. Advancing the ambitious regional Trans-Pacific Partnership talks and sustaining serious U.S. engagement at the World Trade Organization. I repeat, consensus builder. The United States is the world's largest country. It's the world's largest country exporter of goods and services. In 2008, U.S. exports totaled $1.8 trillion and accounted for 13% of our gross national product. Trade and U.S. trade agreements affect all Americans as consumers, workers, families, manufacturers, farmers, ranchers. Provides everything from education to insurance, industrial engineering, film and television program, medical services. American trade policy works towards opening markets throughout the world to create new opportunities and higher living standards for all Americans. I don't know about you, but I, for one, am relieved that the USTR is in the hands of a consensus-building and pragmatic former mayor. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Ambassador Kirk.
I gotta get my pants out of my boots. Mr. Mayor, thank you, even though I'm hiding behind this podium. Boy, what a great friend, what a great mayor, what a mayor from. I tell you, I was wondering, I had to ask him, what the hell are you running for? I mean, he's been with me since breakfast. We were late getting here because of Manny. He kissed every baby, shook every police officer's hands. I mean, I know a little bit about this mayor's thing, so, I mean, I hope your current mayor's sleeping well at night, because Manny's running for, but I don't know. But he's, I have a great affection for Manny, even before he sent the greatest gift to my hometown and my beloved University of Texas and his son that we're hoping will help lead us back to prominence. But the mayor's done a great job for you. Especially pleased to see my good friend, your commissioner, Pepe Diaz. Pepe welcomed me here a year and a half ago. We hit it off immediately. We developed a great friendship. I reached out to him, asked him if he would be willing to come to Washington, serve with us on some of our advisory boards. He immediately says yes. He reaches out to our team. He's one of our few advisory commission members that we don't call Pepe and say, you know, we need you to do. He calls and says, here's what I'm thinking about doing. Here's how I can help. And I think you all know how hard that he works for all of you. So Pepe, thank you for being here. He did not send me the weight loss memo though. He didn't tell me, you know, Kirk, by the way, put your tennis shoes on. It's bad enough having to walk around, you know, with somebody as terminally fit as Manny. But no, Pepe, I'm proud of you. We do. Thank you so much. And Frank, thanks to you and the Beacon Council for welcoming me here. today. I am not here in any capacity but mine as a member of the cabinet, a U.S. trade representative, and part of an effort that the administration started early on through the President's Business Council, in which he literally brought together not everybody, just those of us in the cabinet, but throughout the administration, and said, I want you to understand every one of you all's job is business development. We cannot turn this economy around. We cannot create the jobs that Americans are looking for if every one of you don't fundamentally understand the correlation between what you're doing and how we create jobs, and that this has to be a partnership between us and businesses and chambers and local leaders. And he basically told us, put on, your track shoes, get your passports, get whatever you need, but go out and I want you to engage business and then come back and report to us on what you've heard. And then we're going to try to fix that. And obviously you can't do it all overnight, but it's why sessions like this are so important to us and why I'm so appreciative to the Beacon Council for hosting this event today. To some degree, I'm going to have to apologize and beg your indulgence. A lot of places I go around the country, I have to make the case for trade. And I have to explain to people the correlation, the nexus between trade and the reason for our staying engaged in the world and jobs. I've got a little bit of a sense that that might be an easier sell with this audience than others. And as we like to say in the part of the world where I come from, this is not just preaching to the choir, but this feels like a congregation of choir directors. So if I'm telling you what you already know, forgive me. But I want to take a step back though, because I do think it's important in places like Miami, in which you've got to be as international a community as any city in the United States. I mean, you're blessed with great location. You've got ports, you've got airports, you have people who come from all over, not just Latin America anymore, but you've got people coming from all over the world. This isn't just about standing in the airport and trying to decide whether you're hearing Portuguese or Spanish being spoken. You've got people coming here from Russia and Asia and others because they see this as a great, not only a gateway to the Americas, but a great place to live and work and do business. But one of our challenges, and one of the reasons we've done so much of this domestic travel, is I do think it's important for those of us who easily understand trade to have a little less tin air to our friends who live in places like Detroit and the Carolinas and Maine and the Rust Belt that have a lot of anxiety about trade. And so part of our genesis of doing this was a recognition that in order for me to come to places like Miami or Tampa or Florida or St. Pete or Houston or Washington or Dallas, where you all's message is basically cut the damn brake line, Kirk, go, get these trade agreements, that I had to go to places like Detroit and the Carolinas and Maine and say, tell me what you're angry about. Tell me what you're nervous about. And if we could make that right, will you give us the latitude to go further? Because what people are concerned about is jobs. And we needed to be more honest and receptive to the reality that for an overwhelming majority of our friends and neighbors around America, they had begun to equate trade with, we got all the consumptive business benefits, which was a great thing. But what I heard over and over again, if trade means we get cheaper t-shirts and iPads, but all the jobs are going to go to China, we don't know if we want anything about this. And so part of our effort is how we collectively work together to build an economic case to Americans that's not a slogan, that's not an advertising campaign, but how trade relates to jobs. And not just here in Miami and in Tampa and Florida, but all over America. And that's what the president has been doing through our National Export Initiative and so many others. And it's all grounded in one very simple but powerful belief that in order to create strong, sustained economic growth, that we have to have a balanced approach, not only to getting our deficit under control, revising our tax code, but we've got to focus on those things we know that are going to help grow our economy. And that means we do have to look at things like our infrastructure, and we have to look at our educational investments. And we spent the morning at breakfast over at Miami-Dade College, which is probably the largest educator in the country. And you can't have a discussion about job growth anymore without a discussion about how we educate and prepare our young people to fill those jobs. And so what we have tried to do is bring that balance to our trade policy as well. about how we build a credible case to the American public that being engaged in the world around one fairly simple proposition, that there's still no more powerful brand anywhere in the world than that says made or grown in America. People around the world would love to have something they know that was produced here. But that means we got to be engaged. And that means we've got to be out talking to people, not just our neighbors in Mexico and Canada. I'm thrilled to see so many members of the Consular Corps, and never lose sight of the fact that as exciting as it is to be exploring opportunities in Latin America and Asia and Africa, our strongest trading partners are still our neighbors in Mexico and Canada. Every state I go to has one common denominator. When I give them the statistics, the #1 trade partner is either Mexico or Canada. But one, we need to take advantage of this opportunity to reach out to the world more and help Americans understand we can help create jobs, we can help sustain economic growth by taking advantage of this opportunity to save more, create more, and sell more of what we make around the world. But the other thing we heard as I went around the country, though, is Americans say that's all fine, but that only works if everybody plays by the rules. And so a big part of what we've done in the Obama administration is to elevate enforcement of our agreements on part of negotiating new agreements. Because the good thing is when I went to places like Detroit and Maine and others, despite even my own concerns that I would just be run out of town, I didn't hear people say that they hated trade. They get it. Americans know long term we can't win playing for the 5% of the global population that's us. We want to go compete for that 95%. But I don't think it's too much for people to ask, well, you do one thing, make everybody else play by the rules. Let them open up their markets as freely as we've opened ours. So for the Obama administration, we have put a real highlight on not only opening markets, but enforcing our agreements. And we like to believe the combination of this and everything else we've been doing is working. We are not where we want to be, but we are making progress. And we are not going to walk away from the fact that we've now added 4.5 million new jobs over the last 30 months. That's 4.5 million net new jobs over the last 30 months. Now, by contrast, that just happens to be 4.5 million more jobs than we had at the previous 8 years combined. And we're doing part of that, almost 1.2 million of those jobs are because we're exporting more. As Bill Johnson and others can tell you, one of the initiatives the president has championed was a national export initiative for us to begin to try to sell more. Let's double our exports over 5 years. For every $1 billion we export, that can create or sustain roughly 5,000 to 7,000 jobs. And we've been on a pretty good pace to meet that. But you've got to know we're going to have to double down. We have to collectively work harder and work smarter now, because as the global economy has slowed down, people's ability to buy anything from anywhere has been constrained. And that's one of the reasons we want to come around and engage many of you about how we can do that. What strategies can we put in place to make sure that we take this economic recovery from the slow pace that it's on, that we can elevate and we can get that going. One of the things the president has done is propose a number of ways for Congress to put people back to work. And by doing things that administrations, whether they were Democratic or Republican, have historically done, because they work, because they make sense. And you hear us talk about infrastructure. Well, the reason we do it because it makes sense. We need roads, we need bridges, we need to modernize our ports, we need to modernize our airports. But that's a great way to put all these unemployed construction workers back to work. And if we can get Congress, once we get past the craziness of this election, to even at a time we're dealing with the deficit, let's just do something that, first of all, we need, but also has the added benefit of putting a lot of people back to work. We could do that if we would go ahead and move on that. Secondly, the president's also asked that whatever we do, we cannot ask middle-class Americans to take on any more burden than they've done before. And this president has not raised taxes on middle-class families, but he's cut them every year. But we need to make sure that we keep that going forward so we don't hit middle-class Americans with the tax bill when they come in. Third, we want to make sure that we begin to have a more thoughtful conversation with our neighbors about how they don't have to fear trade. then having a smart, thoughtful trade policy can be a way that we create jobs. This is one of the few places when I come up and talk about Panama and Colombia's trade agreement that everybody knows what I'm talking about, and you applaud. And you actually applaud me, so you can understand why I'm a little bit hyper. This is new ground for me. But I mean, you know, here in Florida, that's a big deal. When those trade agreements were passed, and the fact that we not only passed them, but we were able to put them into force quicker than ever before. And it was fitting that we were last here with the president, I think last May, Bill, at one of the ports on our way to Colombia for the Summit of the Americas, and we were able to announce the Colombia Free Trade Agreement went into effect. And for somebody watching this that may wonder, what does this mean to me? Most of what we sold to Colombia and Panama, we paid tariffs on. But because they are developing economies, we've allowed them to send all their stuff to us for free for years. And we were paying tariffs anywhere from 7% to 85%. 85% of what we now sell to both of those markets is duty-free immediately. And if you're a business selling into those markets, you understand the impact of that. But it also just sent a powerful message to all of Latin America, is that America values this relationship. And what I've heard from all of you is that how Florida is benefiting from the flood of investment and interest from not just Panama and Colombia and Chile and Peru and Brazilians, of people coming here spending money. That's a good thing for us. We welcome that type of investment. We want them buying here, but we not only want that kind of dynamic relationship with Panama and Colombia, we want it with others throughout the region. Congress also has another important opportunity to help us open up a new market, not in this hemisphere, but just as important. During President Obama's leadership, we worked with Russia on one of Russia's long-desired aspirations to become a member of the World Trade Organization. And I think, you know, the World Trade Organization of those 150 plus countries that all agree to abide by certain principles in terms of trade. Why is this important? Russia was the largest economy in the world, not in a rules-based trading system. So one, for those of our businesses doing business in Russia, to the degree that Russia behaved outside the norms, there's nothing we could do but talk about it. Well, Russia is now formally a member of the World Trade Organization, largely because of our leadership. But we have this unique situation because of a law that's been in place for years. It was put in place 40 years ago to try to force Russia and other countries to allow Jews to freely immigrate. We aren't allowed to grant Russia permanent normal trade status, which means we get no benefit from all of our work. So the short answer is we need for Congress to act when they come back and to repeal the application of this Jackson-Vanik law so that you as businessmen and women, if you choose to, have the ability to benefit from all of the things we negotiated, just like every other member of the World Trade Organization, and more importantly, that we have the ability to enforce that as we go forward. We are also making sure, and hopefully, that we can work with Congress when we come back on a thoughtful plan to balance our budget, to begin to reduce our deficit, but not do it in a way that constrains our ability to invest in those things that are going to be critical to our growth in the future. Nothing is more important than education to this president. He has said it over and over again. It is an economic necessity. And the easiest answer I give the people that I talk to is I have the very unique perspective and privilege of having been around the world everywhere you can imagine now 3 times. And the one thing that strikes me as I tell people is that I don't meet a young person in India, Africa, Asia, Brazil that's not polylingual. And in fact, when I was in Brazil, in Sao Paulo, when we were down with the president last year, they have this saying. It's funny, but it hurts. But they joke and they say, now, you know, Ron, if you're polylingual, that means you speak multiple languages. If you're bilingual, you speak 2. If you speak 1 language, you're an American. And you know, we laugh, but it's a nervous laughter. But you know, they'll accept that maybe from me and maybe from Pepe, but from our kids, that ain't gonna be good enough. And while I tell people we still live, we are marvelously more blessed than any other country in the world. And don't let anybody make you believe we've slipped to some second-class status. We're still the most dynamic country in the world. We still offer people more, but the rest of the world has seen that and said, you know what, that's cool, but we want in. And so we now have billions of young people in India and Africa, and they're studying, they're polylingual because they want in on this American dream. And that means we got to double down on educating our young people. And I'll just say it with that. And having been a mayor, let me tell you, I know the reality of urban American education. And I don't care what you say. We can't compete with the world with half of our black and brown kids dropping out of school at the 9th grade. They ain't going to get there. And the fact that kids are first-generation Americans are poor says nothing about their dreams or what's in their heart. And I love reminding people, because I grew up in Texas in segregation. When I was 14 years old, I was a busboy, because everybody black in the South was a busboy. And I know people who looked at me, saw a busboy. They had no idea that I wanted to go to college, I wanted to be a lawyer, and my short answer to them, just because somebody's fixing your roof or cutting your yard, don't look at them see a roofer or a yard cutter. That could be your surgeon, that could be our next president, that could be the next person who comes up with the next Microsoft. We're much better served in making sure we educate these young folks than being afraid of them. I got off script, but I'm real passionate. I'm real passionate about America. But I'm gonna come to a close because I want to take some of your questions. Look, I'm gonna not do numbers because you all understand the power of goods and exporting here. But our biggest challenge is I really want to engage you. You got to convince your friends and neighbors this is real. Because I'm just telling those of us who get trade really need to understand a lot of Americans are afraid of this. We've got to help them understand we shouldn't fear it. And not all imports are bad. You can't make iPods if you don't have raw materials that come out of China and come out of Africa. You can't make furniture. You can't make a car if you don't have parts that come from all over the world. And for a city that's blessed to have a port like you, you know, you get paid whether you're loading or unloading. And you're blessed because you're one of the few ports in America, I think, that actually ships more out than you take in. But either way, it's jobs for us. And it's a great way to ensure our economic growth going forward if we continue to make sure we engage with the world and that we are shipping more out than we're bringing in on those containers. We are doing a lot of other work in the U.S. Trade Representative's office. We didn't just have a party after we passed Panama and Colombia. We're looking for new markets. One of the biggest things we're working on is something called the Trans-Pacific Partnership that would anchor us in another part of the world. And I want to make it plain. This is not what's been defined as an Asia pivot away from the Atlantic. But it is our president taking advantage of the fact that he's a kid who was born in America, but traveled and lived all over the world and understood that we had not fully realized our economic and potential relationships in Asia the way we have in the Atlantic. This is a huge opportunity for us to continue to grow. And it includes important partners in Latin America like Chile and Peru, along with Australia, Brunei, New Zealand, Singapore, and Vietnam. And very soon we're proud that we're going to have Canada and Mexico who are going to be joining us. But it would be the largest free trade zone outside of the WTO in the world and a real game changer for us. Finally, I want to talk a little bit about enforcement because it gets skewed in the debate that we're having going on right now. But our administration made a promise to you and America's workers that we would fight for your rights. And we just think that's only fair. And when we enforce agreements, we're not picking on anybody, but it's pretty hard when you look at our trade deficit to argue that America's been protectionist. You can't go on any college campus in America and not see cars that don't come from all over the world. And we don't begrudge that because that empowers consumers. But it's not too much to say to our trading partners, if you've been selling us stuff freely for the last 30 years, it's time for you to tear down those barriers, give us the same access to your markets. That's all enforcement's about. And when we enforce agreements, we open up opportunities for you and we protect and keep jobs here. During last year's State of the Union address, the president mentioned something called creating an interagency trade enforcement center because he recognized that we were resource constrained. Within 2 months, he issued an executive order to do that. And within 2 months after that, we had it up and running. The important thing, it's given us more resources to go out and do the hard work you have to do to prepare cases, to bring them at the World Trade Organization, and we've done that. And we have brought more cases in the WTO than any administration. We brought more cases against China. And thus far, I'm proud because that's what my office does. Every case that's been decided, we won. Now, again, we're not looking to beat up on anybody, but we're never going to shrink from our responsibility to stand up for the rights of America's workers and America's exporters. But at the end of the day, all of this is about building a sustainable economy for us that will allow us to have an economy that's built to last. And those things that we've been advocating, we're going to continue to advocate for. They're not election year gimmicks. They're not slogans. Investing in our infrastructure makes sense. All you've got, one of the gentlemen we met with this morning talked about coming back from China and the contrast between flying into the new airport in Shanghai and the airport in Kennedy. Now that's a little bit fair. That's like coming to my house that was built in 1932 and coming in one of these new condos that was just built here. But the bottom line, we need to invest in our infrastructure. And we need to understand that includes our roads and our ports and our bridges and our transit system. We need to invest in education, in our young people. We need to empower businesses to continue to grow. We need a fair tax system. And we can do all of those things and bring down the deficit responsibly. But we all got to work together to make that happen. And we need your input. We need your thoughts on how to make that happen. And we need you to join with us when we get past the craziness of this election to go to Congress and say, now it's time to act. It's time to put America first, and let's do what we can to get this economy growing. So I'm honored that I would have a chance to come speak to the council. It's always good to be with the mayor and the commissioner, and I thank you all for giving me this opportunity to spend this time with you. Thank you.
Somebody's got the mics? Okay, there we go. Now we're going to,
Thanks.
first of all, thank you, Ambassador. It was very good to hear all that. But as you said, Miami, we certainly do understand and appreciate trade. So this is one of your easier audiences. The Ambassador's been good enough to take your questions and answer almost anything you might come up with. Let me ask the first one, then I'll go to Charlotte. Because you mentioned the WTO and our assistance to Russia getting into the WTO last month. From what I gather, that Russia will see immediate benefit, but we're at some risk of the U.S. getting benefit if Congress doesn't act on trade preference. Why haven't they, and what's the prospect?
Well, I'm not going to get into why they have an act. Unfortunately, Congress came back from their summer recess and said, we'll be here 2 weeks and we'll come back after the election. I better not speak to that. But the Jackson-Vanik made sense when it was put into place. And it wasn't just directed, it applied to a number of then former communist countries, and basically said we wouldn't trade with them or give them trade status if they didn't do certain things. It served its purpose. I mean, just about anybody in Russia that wanted to immigrate has been allowed to immigrate, but it still has a lot of emotional appeal with people. And I would be honest, there are still a number of very real concerns about human rights, free speech, and other issues in Russia that are yet to be addressed. Some members of Congress believe Jackson-Vanik still has value with that. The challenge with that is that now that Russia's in the WTO, and this is important, I'll take a moment. Understand, we don't have to do anything. We're not giving Russia anything. For Russia coming into the World Trade Organization now, they're reforming their laws. They're lowering their tariffs. We're getting benefits that previously we wouldn't have had, but just as critically, now that they're in, they're subject to what we call the dispute settlement system. But because we have Jackson-Vanik in place, we cannot grant them what's required, which is called permanent normal trade status. Now we have a temporary deal, we give it to them yearly, but in order to get all the benefits, it has to be permanent. So we're now in this perverse situation that if we don't repeal Jackson-Vanik, every other member of the World Trade Organization, every other business is going to benefit from all the concessions Russia's making but us. The commercial argument in favor of this is pretty simple, but you're going to hear very, very passionate concerns about how we put something in place to deal with what some members' concerns are over human rights. And I don't want to get much more detailed than that. I would say, for those who want to follow up on this, our website is ustr.gov, and you can get a lot more detailed information on all of that. But we're hopeful that one of the first things Congress does when they come back after the election is deal with this Jackson-Vanik issue, in addition with whatever they do to avoid this sequestration.
Thank you. Sean?
Good morning. Tell us about Brazil.
Tell me who you are first of all, if you would, just
My
quick.
name is Charlotte Golovway. I'm the president of the World Trade Center in Miami. And, you know, Brazil is a great trade partner of ours, and many of us are greatly interested in knowing, where do we stand with an FTA for Brazil? What's the status of that right now?
Well, Brazil could be a great trade partner, and we want Brazil to be a great trade partner. I think the most important thing is President Obama's decision to make his first international trip this year to Latin America and Brazil was very deliberate. We wanted an immediate engagement with President Rousseff and her team to say, and this is no commentary on our previous relationship, but we should have a much stronger trade and commercial relationship. It has been difficult, I want to be honest, to take that from the promise to the reality. Brazil still is a very difficult market to crack. You all understand. Now, you benefit from it marvelously from what I've heard just with friends at the airport and other because of tourism. But it's a relationship we're looking for tools to find a way to relax some of the trade barriers. We have a trade and investment partnership agreement. We have proposed everything from a bilateral investment treaty. There are other avenues, but you know, at the right time, hopefully, Brazil will be more receptive to them. And I'll be honest, we're frankly hopeful that at some point, the crushing reality of what it's going to take to produce both a World Cup and Olympics and develop this oil field might make Brazil a little more receptive to saying, just let us help. We don't want to take over, but let us help. But when you look at Latin America, as proud as we are of the trade agreements that we have with Peru and Chile and now Colombia and Panama, I mean, you know, anybody as bad as I am with geography, you just can't ignore the fact of 200 million people in the heart of the country. So, and that's one of the things we've been listening to you all to kind of find out what your successes are, what your frustrations, but we're going to keep working on that.
Hi, good morning. I'm Kevin McGurgan. I'm the British Consul General. What I thought...
I could have sworn it was a West Texas. you fooled me for a minute there, Kevin.
I've got 2 points to the question. I mean, firstly, I agree with you. We're sitting in probably one of the most pro-free trade states in the Union, and that's a fantastic thing as far as my government's concerned. As a result of that, you know, the European Union is the largest bilateral direct investor in the state, and more jobs are created in the state as a result of that investment. 39,000 as a result of the UK's own investment here alone. So my question to you would be if we can learn a little bit more about the prospects for an EU-US free trade agreement. I know there's been some discussion. I know there's a potential time frame of 18 months, but at a time when both our economies are struggling, it seems to me this is one of the easiest ways where we can create both jobs on either side of the Atlantic.
Well, since I've made you a fellow Texan, I'll answer with one of our favorite sayings, Mr. Consul. That's not yours. Is not much a question as it is an answer. And I spoke to this more at breakfast. We are heavily engaged in conversations with the European Union about ways to deepen our relationship. And I would note, I mean, our relationship with Canada and Mexico is spectacular. That's about a $3 billion engagement a day, but no two economies are more alike and intertwined than that collectively of the European Union and the transatlantic. I don't know if it's relevant now, but at least 3 years ago, I mean, they'll give you one example. The consul mentioned foreign direct investment. 3 years ago, our foreign direct investment in Brussels was larger than it was in China. Now that says a little bit about how difficult we've had penetrating China. But this is a great relationship. Now I say that because our first order of operating thought on this is to do no harm, since this relationship is working so well. But if we were able to create a truly sort of tariff-free relationship between Europe and the US, but also attack some of the regulatory differences, economists have valued this as potentially from 50 billion to some well over 100, but it would be explosive. But our thought though is, let's be very honest, because we are such old friends. There have historically been a number of issues that have frustrated us being able to conclude a trade agreement. And one of the things we've tried to do is say, if we know there's something we can't resolve, let's just get that out of the way. But our goal is to have what we call a comprehensive agreement. And hopefully we'll be able to announce something on that soon. We have a report to our presidents that's required by the end of the year, and hopefully we'll be able to shed a little more light on that.
Bruce?
Well, Mr. Ambassador, I had the privilege of meeting you a few years ago in Washington. I just want to commend you on the great job you're doing. I was in China a couple of weeks ago, and so I would be very curious about how we're addressing the trade imbalance with China, and also how China is aggressively using trade as an element of soft power in both Latin America and in Africa to advance a lot of the interests in those countries, in those areas.
Well, the first thing we're doing, it's interesting when I talk about Russia joining the World Trade Organization. This is the 10th anniversary of our having gone through the same exercise with China. Mayor Diaz was a brand new mayor. I was at the end of my term, but the administration had to engage mayors and everybody to go and convince Congress that it was in our interest to bring China into a global trading system. The good news, our trade with China has exploded. Now, we do have an imbalance because we buy more from them than we sell. Some of that's a makeup of what we buy from China. A lot of what used to be made throughout Southeast Asia because of this agreement now then got moved to China. But still, there's no question, we think as well as we're doing, and for example, I think China may now be our largest agricultural export market. It's incredible. And that's going to continue to grow as they move people from farms to cities and their taste acquire and grow. But part of our ability to reduce that trade imbalance is the fact that China did a really commendable job the first 6 or 7 years of opening their economy, transforming it. But it did feel like the last 36 months or so, they've become a little more mercantilist. And I don't begrudge them for that, but one thing we said from day in when we came in is we like this relationship. We know it's a necessary relationship, but you got to play by the rules. And so at some point, I use a much more colloquial story as I tell people when I was a kid, I won't give his name, but I still remember the guy who used to beat me up and take my lunch when I was in elementary school. And all my father wanted to know was, did he take your lunch or did you give it to him? And at some point, at some point you gotta be willing to put down the sack and go, today you're gonna take it. And so we're not letting anybody take our jobs and take our lunch. And this is a great relationship. We're not looking for a trade war, but it's hard to argue with the proposition that no country's benefited more from being in the global trading system than China. But that means you have a responsibility that you got to play by the same rules as everybody else. And trade is not sustainable long term if it's only a one-way street. So, our short answer is that we freely buy from China, but they got to open up their markets to us, and they have to engage in the behavior and meet the covenants that they made. So when we file cases, as we did last week, has nothing to do with anything else but the fact that we're holding them accountable. And I know I'm going to spend a minute on this because a lot of people said, well, you only file that case because it's an election year. We have filed cases at twice the rate against China than any other administration. And this is one I would really invite you to go on our website and look at our record. And we file them kind of about once a quarter. One, these cases are very, very difficult to bill. You've got to know China doesn't operate with the same transparency at the local level as you do. They don't open up their kimono, so to speak, and say, here's what we're doing. We have to work with businesses. And in many cases, I'll be honest, because our American companies are invested there, they don't want to cooperate with us because they're afraid the Chinese will retaliate. But as we build those cases, once we have the case, that's when we go to the World Trade Organization. That's why I made that reference to this International Trade Enforcement Center. And when we win those cases, it can be the difference in us getting in a market or us protecting jobs here. And so we're going to do that. We keep pushing them to strengthen their intellectual property rights and to enforce theft and copywriting of materials. And I have two 20-year-old, 20-something age daughters. And I keep telling them, you know, imitation is not the sincerest form of flattery. This is theft. And it'll cripple our economy. So anyway, it's complex. It can be a wonderfully symbiotic partnership because of the advanced stage of our economy and what we can offer China. But it's only going to work if they're willing to open up and work with us in a partnership. Now, I don't begrudge China for their ambition in Latin America or Africa. They certainly need the investment. But I think Latin America and Africa, after 10 years of dealing with China, realized that it's not such a bad thing to do business with a country like the United States in which we respect the rule of law, in which people sell you a product and stand behind it. And that if you buy something, you know, made in America, it's probably going to work the way it is. Or if you call our businesses, they'll make it right. So, you know, the best thing for us in some of these markets is, frankly, they've had 10 years of doing business with China. So we shouldn't fear that, but it should force us and encourage us to be more aggressive about taking up these opportunities, to be more engaged in those markets, particularly given our proximity and the incredible familial relationship we have between the United States and Mexico and Brazil and places in Latin America.
Good morning, Investor Kirk. Carolina Rindero, owner of Right Space, and I chair the International here for Beacon Council. I'm taking us back to Europe again, talking a little bit about the European Union. Portugal is the only country that we don't have a trade agreement with. And when is that going to happen? It was rescinded way back in the 1800s.
Well, I would say one, and forgive me, I should know, is Portugal part of the EU? One advantage of doing this with the EU is it gets us out of doing it on a piece-by-piece business. And one, I would say, and it's my bias from being a mayor, is I found I had a bigger fight. When I came into office in 1995, I was sort of the, you know, new age, young guy, had hair, young wife, 2 cute kids. And I went into my office, and I kid you not, and I went in, I was working late one night, like all new mayors. I went and turned on the radio, and I couldn't figure it out. And I kept staring at this thing. And I had an 8-track tape player in my office in 1995. And I thought, well, how hard will this be? You know, I'm a new mayor, I need some new technology. It was easier to pass a $228 million bond to build our American Airlines Center than to get authorization from my council to go buy a new radio. So what I'm saying is that you learn in government at some point, you're better doing things on a grand scale. And one advantage of if we can get this comprehensive agreement with the EU, it would cover everybody. And then, you know, you're not looking at doing it on a piece-by-piece basis.
There's money for foreign direct investment here, and they can't do it right now.
Well, there's nothing to restrict Portugal from investing here.
No, they can invest here, but it's like they can't bring their employees in on visas and stuff. They've been having an issue with that.
Well, the visa issue is one we're going to have to address in a broader conversation with Congress. And we hear that, and we're working on it. State's done a marvelous job with the resources they have. Our processing of visa applications is down everywhere. But right now, and it's one of those issues, the hard conversations we have to have in this budget debate. Yes, we have to bring down the deficit, but at a time, you're hearing it. You've got more Brazilians, more people from around the world who want to come here and spend money. We ought to make sure that we have the resources and the people to make that happen. That's good for us.
Thank you. Good morning. As you've mentioned, trade between the U.S., Canada, and Mexico, we remain the two largest trading partners. In fact, 70% of our exports come to the U.S., and we certainly import more from you than China several times over, and all of the EU. So we were very, very pleased when we were invited to come to the table for TPP, because we just felt natural and normal that our integrated economies, we should be there together. Now, the fact that two more countries have been invited, can you comment on the time frame, the timelines for completion of this agreement, how it's going? I mean, the WTO is not going anywhere, so this probably, for us anyway, it's a major priority to get it done.
Well, one, I want to be careful and say that our very sincere and urgent interest in moving forward aggressively to conclude this Trans-Pacific Partnership, and now including Canada and Mexico, and hopefully others within APEC, is real, but it is not in any way at all an abandonment of our belief that we still are better served if we can find a way to move forward among all 150 plus economies in Geneva. Now, having said that, with Mexico, one of the geniuses of this Trans-Pacific Partnership is that it is a subset of the 21 members economies that make up APEC, the Asia-Pacific Economic Cooperative. That's one of the best laboratories for trade liberalization in the world. Because for the most part, it's sort of a grouping of countries that said, we're not going to wait on others, we'll experiment, we'll try. There had always been this aspirational goal of having what was called an FTAP, the Free Trade Agreement of the Pacific. And even in the United States and Latin America, for those of us that followed it, after NAFTA and between Mercosur, we've always had some ideas, how do we have one trade agreement covering everybody? A small group of the countries in APEC said, we're tired of waiting. For those who want to move forward, let's go. But it is intentionally designed, one, to be an open architecture, so it wouldn't exclude anyone. But we also agreed we'll begin to work and we'll finish when we can. And the substance will drive our work. We've had 14 rounds of negotiations, which is a lot for 18 months. We just concluded the last round in Leesburg, Virginia. For those of you interested, there is a summary of what we've done on our website. The 15th round will be in New Zealand, Madam Consul, and I know that's the first in which Mexico and Canada will participate. Now, there's different stages of when they'll come in on market access. But obviously, our goal is to conclude as soon as we can. We've made great progress, but with 11 economies as different as Peru and the United States and New Zealand and Malaysia and Canada, the deeper we go, the more difficult it gets. And we know that, and we're dealing with some big, hairy issues. But the good thing is that every country has showed up at every round and brought their full teams. And these are very technical negotiations, so that you know. And my experience, at least, is when people regularly show up at the table and are willing to work, that's a good thing. But I don't want to soft sell, I think, how difficult and how serious some of the issues are. But obviously our goal is hopefully to close, see if we can't reach agreement on the text sometime, within the next year. But we've got a lot of work to do. I think that's the...
Okay, they tell me one more. So who wants the last one? Quickie. I guess you're in.
Robert Arnett, Vice President of Quality of Barfield Incorporated. I too was a busboy and lived in San Antonio and Dallas. The U.S. has enjoyed a $2.4 billion positive trade balance in the aviation maintenance sector, which is and has been shrinking. And the reason being, in August of 2004, part of the Vision 100 Act, Homeland Security was told that they had to write security rules for FAA-approved foreign repair stations. Now, March 2007 came along, they hadn't done anything, and at that time the 9/11 Recommendation Implementation Committee gave them 1 year to write the plan, or else they weren't going to let the FAA approve foreign repair stations. 2008 came, nothing's been done. To date, nothing's been done. The problem is we have a facility in Bogota at the airport in Avianca's hangar, and we can't get FAA approval for the facility till Homeland Security does their job. It's costing us close to $1 million a year. There are much larger companies, Goodrich, Honeywell, that are losing $30 to $36 million a year in lost revenue. Granted, it would create jobs there, but it also create jobs here for support of those positions. I've met recently with Congressman Ballard, Senator Rubio's office. We've given letters to with ARSA in Washington and delivered to the chair and vice ranking member of Homeland Security. And to date, John Pisto says it's not a priority. So my question is, what we really need is to get some sort of pressure somewhere in Washington to either get Congress to lift the ban or get Homeland Security to write these rules.
I will dutifully report your concern. No, I do. I can sense your frustration, and when I will make sure that I share this with my colleagues on the Domestic Policy Council, but with Secretary Napolitano as well.
Commissioner Diaz had a comment.
It's a comment, not a question. So one of the key things that's happened to all of us, as we all know, as we traveled for Washington for several years, was a free trade agreement. Colombia, Panama, and South Korea. Ladies and gentlemen, I will tell you straight out, if it weren't for this man that's sitting right here, it would not still be done. Thanks to him and his leadership, we have those trade agreements all together, because we're just going to pass one, but they're all together. And I want to thank him publicly from all of us.
Thank you, buddy. Appreciate it. Good.
Well, just in closing, I think all of you from here know that we're called the Beacon Council, and our symbol is the lighthouse. The lighthouse was to attract trade and business to our shores, and as the main guy whose responsibility is to do that for our country, we think this is very appropriate that you have a lighthouse as a part of your apparel.
That'll match my suit, so I'll take it.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. No, you are? Good. No, well, you know, everybody knows you.